Good evening. This is Father Joseph Suaidan,
This is Bishop Enoch.
and we're here for our live Q&A that we do every Sunday here, where we take your questions, your comments, your counter arguments, if you have them, and we analyze them and discuss them. Let me think here. Basically, this has been kind of how shall I put this? It's been a week. We all know what's happening in Gaza. We all know what's kind of. I don't know. Have you heard anything about the Ukraine war lately? Because I haven't.
No, not really. No.
No. Yeah, it's just that Zelensky's showing support for Israel. Big deal. But in any case, yeah. So I was today has been, I guess you could say, less than there hasn't been much going on. There may be a debate that I'll be doing tomorrow against an atheist, but it's still, I still haven't gotten full confirmation of it yet. I'm hoping that debate happens, on the existence of God, etc. So it should be kind of interesting. I'll give the details in our Discord and through our Gab and Twitter accounts and various channels that way. So that's going on. Is now I know that there's something new going on. I put it on NFTU. I guess the Synod is having they're having their I guess their synodal meeting. When is that happening?
This upcoming Saturday.
Okay. And so, people are invited if they have, communications, etc., with our clergy, if they're interested in that they can reach out and and if they have requests to make in terms of, things that need to be taken care of that the bishops need to review, then we're there for that. Outside of that,
they're not invited to. People aren't invited to just show up. By the way,
no, not show up. You have no submit requests by email and.
If you want the bishop, if you want us to talk about something or address an issue, send a letter to the bishop or call them on the phone or something like that.
Yeah, it's not like an open forum at the synod meeting. That's not. We don't do that. That had bad consequences once. Anyway,
you can't just say whoever comes off the street. No, that's not what's going to happen. So, all right, go ahead.
All right, so let me see here. Now, you had mentioned earlier, Vladika, that there was something from, and I want to put that on the screen if you have it. That you said basically a part of von Zernikov's work had kind of been paraphrased by John Mason Neal or something like that.
Yes.
All right, give me a moment. Okay, here's the link. Give me just a moment while I put this on the screen. And so we're going to talk about this because, okay, just for people
now, if you go up to page, you have to go to page 1095.
Okay, hold on, please. Okay, it's a pretty long text.
It's like 1,000. It's over. It's almost 1,300 pages. The section I'm talking about. Go to page 1095.
Right. Now, one thing to keep in mind, just because we do want to remind the audience who may not know who von Zernikov is, if they haven't been following.
Adam von Zernikov was a German-Polish, I'm not ever quite sure, but German-Polish nobleman who was dedicated to, I think he had originally been a Lutheran. And he came to the conclusion that he didn't believe Lutheranism was sustainable on the basis of the church fathers. So then he said, what are the two options? You either got orthodoxy or papism. All right. So he studied the church history and, especially like papal supremacy, but also the question of the Filioque. He went to Oxford at one point to look at manuscripts and to go to school there. He traveled throughout Europe. And he wrote a large book called "Concerning the Procession of the Holy Ghost from the Father alone." That's the English title. The Latin title, I can't quite remember the exact terms now. So it was originally like a 1,200-page book, and in it he collected various testimonies from the Eastern and Western Fathers, and he was actually able to show that a good number of the then printed editions of the Fathers in the 1600s were interpolated, or they were just simply fabrications, especially Western fathers, on regards of the interpolation of the Filioque. Not that the fathers were just made up or what have you. So his work became very important, and it's never been translated into English. Various persons have taken sections from it, because if you take this work, if you go down, scroll down to the next page, okay, all right, okay, go down further, okay. Now, so this is John Mason Neale basically composed this article at the end of his book. And he says, on the Greek side, that's the Orthodox side, my authorities are chiefly one, the most elaborate and learned work of Adam Zernikoff in 2 small quarto volumes, Berlin, 1774. 2, the treatise of Demetrius Prokopovich, in great measure condensed from Zernikoff. 3, the various popular treatises published in 1698 by Dositheus in his tome Tomos Agapes, Jassy, Moldova, and so forth and so on. So anyway, the work I think is important if you're interested in. I mean, obviously he's an Anglican, but I can tell he's sympathetic to the Orthodox position. But so what I find interesting, though, is if you scroll down, and I will tell you exactly where. I mean, all of this is interesting. If you scroll down to, I believe, page, let me see. Forgive me, I didn't have everything ready at the moment.
That's okay.
Okay, if you go down to page 1100 and 20. Well, if you go to page 1123.
Okay.
All right, let's just give you an example.
Hold on a moment.
Give you an example here.
Okay.
All right. Well, this is just an example. So there's I think it was a Jesuit writer called Petavius. All right, and he tried to defend the Filioque, but as Neale points out, Petavius either fabricated material or he used already existing interpolated material. For example, there's a treatise that St. Ambrose wrote on the Creed, and Petavius quotes it as saying, St. Ambrose saying, the Holy Ghost who proceedeth from both, he neither had any beginning, etc. And Neale says this etc. was very necessary to the controversialist, as will be seen if we proceed. Quote, he neither had any beginning himself, because his procession is continuous, and from him that had no beginning. For the Father had no beginning, and because he had no beginning, neither had the Spirit a beginning, and for this reason, that he is in him and is his. End quote. The barefaced effrontery of the insertion of from both instead of from the Father is plain. But who after this would ever take a quotation of Petavius again on trust? Now, this is interesting. Neale was pointing out, based upon earlier writers, that the Jesuits, the various Roman Catholic writers in the Counter-Reformation period, if not before, simply were inserting words, all right, like from both into patristic texts. They were simply lying. Wow. They were straight up lying. This is why Neale says, "Who can? If after seeing what Petavius did here, why would anybody trust him ever again?" The following is quoted from St. Ambrose's Treatise on the Holy Ghost. It says, "The Spirit, since he proceeds from," this is how they quote it, is they quote it as saying, "The Spirit, since he proceeds from the Father and the Son, is not separated from the Father, is not separated from the Son. For how can he be separated from the Father, who is the breath of his mouth?" And Neale points out, manifestly, either another clause is wanting, and how can he be separated from the Son, etc., or the italicized words or insertions. That's another thing you'll see even in these 17th century texts. Mm-hmm. There'll be some sort of italicized word, okay, and it'll be their way of interpolating something, but without exactly, but giving themselves a sort of a way out, so they can claim, "Well, I didn't say he said it. I just put the text in there." Anyway, the Benedictine editor.
Worth noting is that just as a side note, the Missale Mixtum actually, for the Mozarabic service in the Creed, actually puts the Filioque in italics.
Yes, because it wasn't there in the original text. In fact, in Denziger, the 19th century Roman Catholic compilation of patristic material, whenever you will see numerous places where there are italicized text in just a regular text. And it's almost invariably something about the Filioque. All right.
Well,
the Benedictine editors say Ambrose here and at the end of the next chapter uses the word procession in the sense of missos, wherefore it is strange that Estius should say that this sense does not occur except in such writers as Bede, etc. That is, they were clearly persuaded that Ambrose did not insert the procession in the Latin sense in this question. Anyway, so there's a lot of stuff by St. Ambrose that he brings up that's interesting. But what I wanted to talk about briefly would be if you go down to the next page, so page 1125.
Okay, give me one moment.
Okay.
Why is it? Okay, there we go. Okay, 1125.
Okay, it says Saint Augustine has usually. I'm just going to read it in the comments. Okay, Saint Augustine has usually been considered as the great champion on the Latin side. George Scalarius attacks him on this account and says that he invented this system in order to be able, with more effect, to attack Nestorianism. The accusation, of course, on a consideration of time, refutes itself. Obviously, that's Nestorianism really came out in a little bit after St. Augustine died. Much more to the purpose, he in another place quotes St. Augustine himself as a witness that the sayings of one or two fathers are not to be taken against those of the majority of the fathers. We have already seen strong reasons for believing that St. Augustine held the single procession. So further up, if you go like pages up, we're not going to do that. He provides reasons for showing that St. Augustine did in fact hold the view that is the correct view. The following are the passages alleged against it. Now, it says the first is in everyone's mouth. Quote, this is what they quote from De Trinitate. And yet not without reason, in this Trinity none is called the Word of God except the Son, nor the gift of God except the Holy Ghost, nor he of whom the Word is begotten, nor he of whom the Holy Ghost principally proceeds except God the Father. I therefore have added principally because the Holy Ghost is also found to proceed from the Son. End quote. That's from book 15. Okay. Now, granting this passage to be uncorrupted, it tells fully as much against the Latins as against the Greeks, Neil claims. The Holy Ghost proceeds principally from the Father, says St. Augustine. The Holy Ghost proceeds alike from Father and Son, says Innocent III in the Lateran Council, that's the 1200s. The Holy Ghost does not proceed principally from the Father, says Anselm. Well, that's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, okay. 2, the passage was never quoted till late in the controversy, occurring in a writer of such unrivaled weight in the Western Church, occurring in one of his best-known works. How can we account for this but by believing it to have been a late insertion? Nor does it seem credible that Anselm would have given a point-blank contradiction to one who was evidently his favorite teacher had his copy of St. Augustine contained the words in question. 3, it is strange that in so short a sentence there should be 3 suspicious words, additi, principaliter, and reparitor. Reparitor is found in the schoolman's words in this sense, is found, that is, in the fathers, but it is not St. Augustine's word. It is true that he could not say scriptum est, it is written, because it is not so written in the Holy Scriptures. But his usual expression in this sense, in this case, would be quia et de filio procedere spiritum sanctum didicimus. A more diligent grammatical search in St. Augustine might perhaps bring to light a similar use of reparitor, but everyone will agree that it is not common, not his common word with such a meaning. Principaliter, too, is a word of the schoolmen, all right, the scholastics, in the sense of principally. But in the age of St. Augustine, it usually signified royally, just as in the Vulgate, et spiritu principali confirma me, and govern me by thy princely spirit. Okay, establishment by thy princely spirit, from Psalm 50, I believe. Additi is a very singular expression. I believe no similar use of the word can be found in St. Augustine, who would certainly have said dixi. These 3 verbal objections, of which each by itself might perhaps be got over without any great difficulty, certainly become very formidable when taken together. And they are more formidable when we consider that an honest copyist, if intending to accommodate St. Augustine to the Latin doctrine, by which he means the Papist doctrine, would just have used them and none others. Thus the copy would be, and yet not without reason, none is called in this Trinity the Word of God except the Son, nor the gift of God except the Holy Ghost, nor he of whom the Word is begotten, nor of whom the Holy Ghost principally proceeds except the Father. Now, then, the scholastic word principaliter words principaliter and reparator are quite in place, and the deity is clear, comes in with perfect sense. But grant the passage to be genuine, then we may translate it thus. Now he of whom the word is begotten, nor from whom, as from a principle, the Holy Ghost proceeds, except the Father. I therefore add, as from a principle, because the Holy Ghost is also found to proceed from the Son, that is, by way of mission. Now, we a few days ago, maybe last week, I talked about how in Book 15 of St. Augustine, if you look in earlier manuscripts like the 751 manuscript, that it had like something like 3 or 4 pages missing, not in there that were in later texts. And this is in fact the section that Neil says he doubts if this was genuine. This looks like it was a later interpolation made in an attempt to kind of post facto confirm St. Augustine in a much later argumentation. So that does seem to be, Neil does seem to be accurate. All right. When he says that this looks like a suspect passage. All right. Because we look in the earliest pages, earliest manuscript I could find at least, and it's not there. All right. Wow. So anyway, I think this is an interesting treatise. If somebody's interested in reading it, like he goes through,
oh yeah, let me put a link to it. Hold on.
He goes through a number because he's essentially repeating things that other Orthodox writers had written, and for some reason, there's simply been zero interest, by the way, Father Joseph, in translating any of this into English. It's just like people gave up sometime in the late night, like almost when apologetics. I mean, almost Bolotov probably was involved with that in the 1890s because he was a Russian writer who kind of thought, well, we just have to concede the Filioque way to the West, and let's just. I don't know why he thought that, but he sort of made that statement. He sort of became dominant, but Orthodox, for whatever reason, beginning of the 20th century, really, I guess, gave up this argument. About interpolations in the fathers. I don't know why, because maybe some of them didn't know Latin. I'm not exactly sure. Though I should say I should retract that a bit. I think one of the reasons, Father Joseph, as we have discussed, would be that, remember, the Moscow Patriarchate formally abjured apologetics during the entire Soviet period.
Correct. So that was something.
So they would not have exactly. They would have said there's no reason to do this. Don't even do apologetics against atheism. They went to that extent. But Neil goes down here and he points out in various works of St. Augustine, you can find the best manuscripts. It will not say from the Father and the Son. It'll just say from the Father in various places. There's one sermon attributed to St. Augustine that is not even St. Augustine's, and then they attribute it to Alcuin of York, and it turns out it's not even from Alcuin of York. I'm not sure who's it from, who composed it. So anyway, and he also points out, he says in the bottom of page 1127, okay. He says, in the same manner, those long disputations for the procession of the Holy Ghost from the Son, which occur in chapter 26 and 46, I think, of the 15th book on the Trinity, and again in the 99th treatise on St. John, are manifestly insertions. All right, that's what we were talking about. All right.
We got a comment, so just putting that up there.
Yeah. What does it say?
It says it's from Atomic Lead. Once again, St. Augustine is shown to support the same pneumatology as in St. Maximus's letter to Marinus.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. They allude to a controversy as raging in the church, which we know had not been heard of at the latest period of which St. Augustine could have written. And it is remarkable that Venerable Bede, writing on the 16th chapter of St. John, and quoting from the 99th treatise or tractate of St. Augustine, completely misses and ignores all that part which is concerned with the procession. What clearer argument, and then, by the way, manuscripts, from what I recall, manuscripts that deal with the tractates on John, if you ever look at early church fathers, like the old Nicene and post-Nicene fathers, as St. Augustine's tractates on John, like manuscripts that go from like something like 70 to 120 or 115, there's some major problem with that whole manuscript tradition. All right. If somebody's interested in looking up the problems with that later, so it's almost like someone messed with it, right? What clearer argument can there be of an interpolation? Indeed, if anyone will read over the 15th book, De Trinitate, without a controversial purpose, he can hardly fail of being struck with the marked difference in manner of section 45, sec edition Bassano. So that's in a certain edition, with the scholastic disputations on the procession and the earnestness with which the opposite dogma is attacked. It is much to be wished that some scholar would give us a critical edition of the whole work De Trinitate, having a special eye to manuscripts of earlier date, if such exist of it, then the great schism. All right. If its genuineness can be proved in the 15th book, which I will not believe till I see it done. Undoubtedly, so far as the testimony of the Latin fathers are concerned, the Greek cause is ruined. I mean, that's a little extreme, even if it was. But the point is that large portions that we can tell from manuscripts, large portions of that book 15 simply are interpolations.
Wow.
I mean, we showed it the other, briefly in discussion.
Right. We showed it. We saw it live in the manuscripts.
It's like literally it goes from this word to this word. And if you look in the standard Latin edition, like in Patrologia Latina or the English translations, someone literally put 3 or 4 pages worth of material in between 2 sentences, and then disjoint, and then had to kind of connect the clauses as such. It says, and the same thing would be said of Book 5, Section 15. I cannot imagine an unprejudiced person reading the processional parts of these 2 books without feeling the strongest conviction that they are late insertions. Notice also another very suspicious argument at Section 5 of Book 2. I do not remember to have seen the latter referred to by the Greeks. Okay, so, I think that's, and he also goes through St. Leo the Great's letter to, and that's the next page, to Torribius of Astorga. And now there's actually a little bit of a question about whether that's actually St. Leo the Great who wrote that letter. He doesn't really mention this, or whether it was Leo maybe like Leo the Fourth or something like that, or what have you. So we're not quite sure even at that point. The Confession of Eugenius of Carthage, he mentions at the bottom. Now that if you get the book, the translated text from historians text by Saint Victor of Vita or Victor of Utica. You can see this, that confession was interpolated, because in any modern critical edition, which the translated text historian seems to be intent on doing, there is no mention of the Filioque, when it would seem like they'd have mention or have impetus to put it in there, and their confession to the Arian king when they had to sort of justify the Orthodox faith to the Arians. He goes on with other examples. He refers to, on the next page, on 1130, the dialogue St. Gregory the Great. Now, I can tell you, and this was something, there was a gentleman named Basil Polivka. I don't know if this is his real name, but I used to interact with him on Facebook years and years ago. Well, not 2018 or 19. And he looked up the Egerton manuscript. Like, it was the first manuscript he looked up from the 10th century in Anglo-Saxon England. And the original manuscript simply just from Book 2, at the very end of it, the dialogues, just simply has the Holy Ghost ever proceeded from the Father. But then someone above, and in a manuscript above, wrote et filio, literally not in part of the text, right? It's like in the margins. So, obviously a lot of this has been shown to be accurate in terms of later writers, settling the question simply by making up facts or lying. All right. And if you have to, use interpolated text to justify your case, Father Joseph, that probably indicates to me that you don't have a very good case. That if the best you could do is maybe out of 200 interpolations, let's say if 7 of them are genuine, in the context of those 7 that are genuine, maybe 1 or 2 at best are ambiguous. Like, you can find ambiguous texts in many fathers because they're writing about some obscure subject that we aren't quite aware of. All right, that's not enough to base a doctrine like Anselm's doctrine of the Filioque, etc., and to cause a schism in the church, is it? It's not.
Exactly.
All right, that's it's just simply absurd, and it leads to the conclusion that what we call Roman Catholicism what makes it distinctive from orthodoxy, all right, and all these issues, is to be very blunt, is a tissue of lies, all right. It's simply based upon. It's almost like they got to the 11th century. The so-called Gregorian reforms happened. They have to collate every single bit of fabricated material they could find. They have to spend 50 years forcing this down everybody's throat through various violent means. Through the average way, the average way an average priest or bishop in the West, the way they interacted with the Great Schism in the West was when somebody showed up to the village and said the priest and he has to give up his wife and his children need to be sold into slavery. All right, that's how they interact with it. All right. And
I mean, to be fair, that just so people are clear, they actually would accuse them of, basically an adulterous marriage, despite their protests. And
it didn't matter. They would simply say that you're not supposed to have a wife. It doesn't matter if you got married. For example, the Lombard clergy, who basically the northern, almost all of northern Italy, Cisalpine, Gaul, Switzerland, those areas. You cannot even make the accusation that those people were like priests who got married after ordination. All right, because we know very clearly from 11th century sources that it was the rule of. It says that on those churches that followed the rule of St. Ambrose, it says that they were required. The priest, a man was required to get married. He had to be a virgin, and he had to marry a virgin before he was even ordained like a subdeacon. All right, so they were even stricter than many other areas. All right, and it didn't. And you know what? The Hildebrandians, it didn't matter to them. All right, so it didn't matter whether you were dealing with somebody who followed the strictest rule, or you were dealing with places where they married after ordination. I'm not justifying that or what have you.
Right.
Although I should point out that in the Byzantine Church until about the 930s, they had for various reasons allowed a priest to marry after ordination, and that was sort of based upon an extension of the canon concerning the deacon. All right, if you're referring to, and that had to do more with the fact that a lot of areas that were destroyed by the Muslims or a plague had come through, they needed to ordain priests, and many people simply were like, "Well, I can't find a wife," so the bishop would say, "Well, they used to allow this for deacons, so we'll allow it for you." But anyway, the point is that you can only go so much in attacking people in certain places of the West for allowing that when it was allowed in the Byzantine Church, and after a few decades, they sort of disallowed it. But the point, nevertheless, is the justification for what distinctively became Roman Catholicism is based upon erroneous history or lies. There's just no other way of thinking about it. And remember, after the Great Schism and the process, the 50 years of it as imposition in the West, finally sort of ending around the early 1100s, 1115, 1122, when they had the Emperor Henry V sort of gave in finally to the papacy, and whatever. I mean, it was bad, it was evil. Okay, well, how long did that last, Father? I mean, you have 1100, and then around the 1400s, you start to have the Hussite schisms and rebellions, the Proto-Reformation, and the Reformation just comes on the scene in the 1520s, and like half of Latin Roman Catholic Europe is no longer part of it.
Well, don't even forget like the cases of things like the Albigenses that eventually.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, yeah, exactly. And remember, the Albigensians originally, if I'm referring to there were some of them were
Cathari or something.
Yeah, there were some that were Cathars, but there were people who simply objected to the corrupt system that had come about, and there's no chance of reform in an orthodox sense at that point.
Yeah.
All right. So what's going to happen? People are going to start turning to more and more extreme positions. All right. And you can even actually, this is my other theory, that you can look at the way the Reformation was conducted, at least in Northern Europe. Okay. That it was radical because they got rid of the doctrines like of the Mass and such. But the way they imposed it, the Lutheran reformers, for example, the way they imposed it upon the population was eerily similar to the way that the Protestants and like the Vatican II people imposed their reforms and papacy.
Correct.
That is, they knew that they can't change the outward sections of the Mass. I mean, the Calvinists didn't care. That was much more extreme. But like in Sweden, northern Germany, etc., they kept like all the outward accoutrements. All right. And like Luther would even say, don't preach these doctrines, just preach like positive, quote unquote, evangelical doctrine, and we don't care about the other stuff. It'll just follow over time. So you can even see that the way that they caused this to come about was it was like in a conservative in an exterior form, though radical in content. But that's also a common way heretics go about things. Anyway.
Now there is a question in the chat here from Brian the Swede.
Okay.
And this is an interesting question because I know that the answer is going to be a little bit mixed. How do we approach the additional creeds in the West? Apostles, Nicene, Athanasian, missing one, obviously without Filioque. Do each have a place in the liturgy? As Lutherans, we seem to use them interchangeably.
Okay. The Nicene or Nicene Constantinopolitan symbol of faith, the Mass Creed, is used for Western Rite, obviously I'm speaking, is used in the Mass. Yes. All right, on Sundays and on feasts. It is used also for, we have it in our service book, it's used for visitation of the sick and holy unction and such. It's also used in the baptismal service. Apostles' Creed, that was used in various services, like for the baptism sometimes. Some places use the Nicene, some the Apostles. The Apostles' Creed is more likely to be found in parts of the divine office, like on Prime and Compline. All right, the people would either say the Apostles' Creed before the service, or they would say it as in a subdued voice, like the Our Father, during parts of the what are called preces and such.
And the Athanasian.
And the Athanasian would be used from Prime. The Athanasian symbol of the Creed or the Quecunque Vault would be used at least on Prime of Sundays at the end of the Psalms. All right. Although some books indicate it was supposed to be, in some places they use it on every single, on Prime on all days. And so, I mean, it's not really, maybe call it a creed. It's not really, it's more, it's sometimes it's called the hymn of St. Athanasius and what have you.
Now, I see Father Boniface has joined the chat. I'm curious as to, I guess you might have a question or a comment. Hold on one moment.
Good evening.
Hello.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yep. Yes, we can hear you.
Great. Well, good evening. Great to be here. I took a course online, or no, it was like on YouTube, with Professor Kenneth Pennington from the Catholic University of America. It was a freebie, so I just ordered it. It had like 27 lectures, and I took good notes on it. And all this interpolation brings to mind, and I have my notes here, talking about the forgeries of the pseudo-Isidorian forgeries of the 8th and 9th centuries or something. Let me see. Yeah, and so you're looking at Rome having a testimony of forgeries and of creating their own fictitious canon law stories to actually to create their own canons, using fictitious legal events so that they could create a body of law. And so this was accepted.
Yeah, that
was accepted.
I was just going to say, that the first use of the pseudo-Isidorian decretals in formulation of, I guess, Roman Catholic canon law would start with the defenses of the Decretals Papae and other similar teachings that came out around the.
Now, remember when in the 850s and 60s, since I'm translating Hincmar of Reims' defense for the rights of metropolitans, there were attempts to use the pseudo-Isidorian decretals to justify papal intervention in trials of local provincial synods. And the almost universal reply of the German and French bishops at the time was to simply reject them. fact, Archbishop Hincmar said he had never seen any of these texts. All right, that the people from Rome were bringing forward. All right, and his reply was either one, they're fabrication, which is the truth, or interpolations, or two, that if there was some pope who did say something like this, if he did, it could not overrule the canons.
Well,
Right.
this is interesting because
So
that would
the
mean
result was that as you get into the 9th and 10th century, there was almost like a complete attempt to ignore by the northern churches these, because they were simply regarded as absurd. All right, I think Archbishop Egbert of Trier said something like they obviously were fabricated. All right,
well, that's
Spain and England, they weren't even known until after 1080. All right,
yeah.
So what happens is that, as Father Boniface and Father Joseph pointed out, that they had to find some way to justify this material. And in the period of the so-called Gregorian Reform, Hildebrandian Reform, they did this by compiling canonical collections. All right, like Ivo Chartres was one of them by 1100 or so, in which they incorporated these false decretals as if right beside canons from Nicaea or Chalcedon. All right, so that was the only and you find out also. By the time you get to the 15th century, however, it was almost impossible to defend the authenticity of the pseudo-Isidorian decretals. So everything began to collapse. I mean, that's almost the predecessor to the attitude people had before the Reformation. All right, where papism had sunk its case so much into these false decretals and had attached itself so much to them. All right, that once they were proven false, people rejected not only the obvious papist doctrines, but people were led to reject even things like that were correct doctrines, like the priesthood or something like that, because people begin to say, well, who knows? Maybe they made everything else up, which is not the correct way to think about it, because obviously you can say, look at the Orthodox in the East, they never accepted that stuff, but they have the doctrine of the priesthood. All right, I have to use the restroom. Father Joseph, be right back. Hold on.
Yeah, it just created fodder for the Protestant Reformation. It just gave them all kinds of material to show corruption in Rome. And so it says that, why weren't the Protestants listening to the East? And that's where, Dositheus comes in with Melanchthon, and they did have a conversation, but Melanchthon just dropped the ball with him because he wasn't listening to the East. And so
the letters back and forth, the two mentions.
Yeah, so it just makes you wonder why the Protestants weren't giving a better ear to the East when they're seeing all this centuries-old corruption and the doctoring of the documents by Rome, and so so this kind of interpolation is just ready to you just see why, because they already had a history of this kind of behavior. So in other areas, especially in canon law, when they're adopting the fictitious scenarios and giving them credit to be genuine scenarios, and so therefore they made their law upon these things. So anyway, it's just so I just thought I would just bring that into the mix, because it's just another testimony of what's going on with these issues. So anyway, Rome accepts it. Rome accepts it in a lot of ways. Okay, well, this is what they did in the past, so I guess it's okay. Well, it's not okay.
No, it's not.
So anyway.
Well, I think that definitely, one can be forgiven, I think, during those early communications between the Lutheran theologians and the Patriarch, because I think to some degree, even though I think both sides were kind of mutually shocked, I think that the early Protestants probably thought that they had restored the doctrines to the way the Orthodox did things, and simply had never actually asked them. And from the Orthodox side, I think the claim that they were trying to purify the Church of error, and they realized just how far gone they had gotten, led to kind of mutual disagreement. But unfortunately, that was unavoidable when you kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Well, remember, there was simply going to be no. I mean, if you are a Reformed Protestant, that is Calvinist or Zwinglian in the 1550s, there's simply no way that like Orthodox people interacting with you are going to find any kind of commonality, because Calvinism had essentially rejected any substantive doctrine of the real presence. All right, Calvin even and Theodore Beza and others even went to the point of saying that even when like they might theoretically accept like baptismal regeneration for an infant, but then they would also say that God only regenerates the elect infants. All right, which leads to the fact that you could have your baby baptized and well, who knows if the infant was really regenerated? God may have chosen not to do that. Whereas when you look at like the Tübingen scholars interacting with the Patriarch, I mean, there were certain aspects of like Lutheranism. Obviously, it's still heretical, but there were certain aspects like it had a belief in a physical real presence of all right. It had belief in baptismal regeneration as having universal application through baptism. They retained various liturgical aspects and such. Even though they may have denuded, or they did denude the interior essence of those things. I think that may have been why it appeared like that. And then, like even in like the northern Scandinavian churches, like Sweden and Norway and such, they attempted to sort of like retain something like the episcopacy. And there are even things like the Red Book of King John V, where they wanted to sort of retain as much of the pre-Reformation mass word as possible. Although, and even the Roman Catholic Encyclopedia, like the 1911 Catholic Encyclopedia, will admit that even as late as like 1700, like the vast majority of Scandinavian Lutherans still venerated relics and images, because because not because it was allowed, but simply because the Lutheran authorities just took over the central areas like Copenhagen or Stockholm or what have you, and they sort of just tried to rule from there and gradually impose the doctrine on the population. All right. But again, but you see what happened with Lutheranism. All right. So by the end of 1800, you have Lutheranism in 1680, 1690 being sort of what was called the high point of confessional Lutheranism, so-called confessional orthodoxy. And then by 1800, it's sort of like this pietistic, Quatanus subscription Lutheranism. And then by 1830, like 1850, most Lutheran clergy in the continent don't believe in the virgin birth. All right. A lot. That's why, and then they forcibly, the German government's principalities forcibly united like Calvinists, Zwinglians, and Lutherans into one church in 1817, 1819, 1820. All right. And even got to a point where there was a Prussian General Synod in 1835 in which the King of Prussia tried to gather all the Protestant clergy together. And when they heard what they were preaching, there was this elderly Prussian general in the 80s was so shocked by various Prussian professors of theology denying the divinity of Christ and the virgin birth that he took out his sword, all right, and drove them all out of the church. All right. So that's more of an example of the aristocracy being more conservative in its religion than what was actually happening. And in history, that's sort of what causes immense exodus, where people left, let's say, continental Germany, came to the United States or other areas because they could not tolerate having to be forced into sort of this like liberal Protestant state church where they would have to accept Calvinists, Zwinglians, modernists, liberals, everybody else. All right. So I mean, you get to the point where by 1930, the dean of German Protestantism was Adolf von Harnack. All right, he has speeches from 1870 where he says he doesn't believe in the miracles of Christ. Christ was, he would say you can still call Christ the Son of God and use the Nicene Creed, but it'd be like poetry. Like he's the John Shelby Spong of his day, I guess. All right. So,
wow.
You can see how everything simply just fell apart. Literally, you go from 1800 to 1900. You go from 1800, sort of this confessional pietistic Lutheranism. In 1900, you're basically dealing with deism, state deism. That's essentially
Yeah.
what's taught in European Protestant churches, right? And America and England are only a few, decades at most behind when this happening to them. All right. So
what comes to mind. I appreciate your comment. Was, let's say, with Martin Luther, when he institutes the right of private judgment, then you have a crash of authority, and not only in church authority, but also in civil authority in the governments. Because so I would like to add the idea that the Protestant Reformation played on the kings and the civil authorities, to say that, hey, we want to get rid of Rome. We're tempted now to have independent authorities and independent churches. We like Calvin because we can agree with his doctrine, and we can get rid of hierarchy, church hierarchy. And so you have the interplay down through the centuries now, the succeeding centuries, of everybody has the ability to kind of pick and choose what kind of doctrines they want and how these authorities are going to play. So the Lutherans have a certain appreciation of icons, and so then it's a supermarket of how much authority we want to connect to doctrine. And so then it just plays on down to where it's getting worse and worse and worse. And so everything is atomized. And so, of course, it has devolved to where we're at today. But, I see a play in Europe of where would have been the appreciation and honor of hierarchy, as well as is compromising itself, and people are flushing it down the toilet, and it's leaving a vacuum, which Orthodoxy is saying, hey, here we are, we're out here in the East, we're still upholding the standard, but you're all kind of sliding down the hill here. And so, where do we go from there? And so that's kind of just an observation of what I'm seeing as a dynamic that was at work through history in these ages, as you're talking it out here.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
in the present era, obviously, that's not the case really anymore. But definitely, I mean, there's something to be said for in terms of the market of authority. That was something that was even used by temporal sovereigns throughout Europe to try to, sometimes their confession kind of went with exactly what they wanted to wield in terms of power.
Well, as Father Boniface points out, at this point, Roman Catholicism has essentially destroyed itself as a functioning force. It was not just a combination of sort of like the currents of history, and there is an extent to which Dr. J.J. Overbeck was correct he was absolutely correct when he said Roman fabricating history has sealed its own fate. All right, but it's also another factor that it gave in to all the liberal modernist trends in the 20th century. It just simply surrendered its own force to it for various reasons, obviously. And European Protestantism had already disintegrated. In the case of Orthodoxy, the main problem is how does Orthodoxy pick up the slack when Orthodoxy, even in the East, is in just terrible shape. All right, this is not the best picture. If Orthodoxy wins, we win because we're the true church, and also in a practical sense, we win if we just simply the people who stay true the longest in a various area. All right, if you win simply because you're the least bad of all the options, but you have to also consider that in Europe, the large portions of the population are even in the white European population, like the native population, are atheist or agnostic. I think they did statistics, something like 60% of Sweden is atheist.
Wow.
Something like 50% of the French are atheists. Spain has large numbers like that too. Like, even though Franco won, those atheist communists, they may have gotten put in prison or executed, but a lot of them simply stayed behind. All right. They didn't, same thing in Italy. The anti-clerical forces continued. The Communist Party continued to have a major impact on these areas. France never recovered from the Enlightenment and the Reformation. It just simply never had a chance after that point. I mean, I think I mean, you will talk to people who come from the United Kingdom, and they will say, like a lot of Scotsmen or Englishmen, it's not even atheism with them; it's just agnosticism. It's indifferentism. All right, they simply don't care about religious issues, even at this point.
Well, I think that
If you find somebody going to church in a lot of these countries like France or the Netherlands or the United Kingdom, there's sort of a joke that you're more than likely to find a Polish guy going to a church in England or the Netherlands, and you're to find an Englishman or a Dutchman going to a church. Wow. That's sort of like a Polish immigrant or what have you. So you know, that's the situation we're up against. And even in Russia, let's be frank, about 0.5% of the population in Russia goes to church even on Pascha or Nativity. All right. And about maybe a few 100,000 people go to church even on a regular Sunday in Russia, according to the official statistics by the government, the VTSIOM or something like that. So you're dealing with a situation that is, you know, it's where there's simply been this disintegration. You have Marxist atheism on the one hand, which dominated Eastern Europe, all right, and it did its number. And then you have revolutionary Western liberalism on the other hand, that dominated Western Europe on the other, and they each have destroyed their respective societies in many ways.
Well, I mean, at the risk of sounding completely pessimistic, we do see, especially in new polling in the United States at the very least, that there is a trend towards religiosity among younger generations that has suddenly popped up in the last 7 to 8 years. I don't doubt that that's possible in Europe. I mean, it may take something like, like what's happening right now, even recently. I mean, because we're all when we're talking about Europe, we're leaving out the elephant in the room, and the elephant in the room is the massive number of Muslims that have moved into the area. If the ethnic, indigenous population of Europe is becoming atheist, unfortunately, then the loudest voices that are going to scream are going to be those of Islam. And ultimately, I think that is going to cause a backlash. I think it is already starting to cause a backlash. And often with that backlash, we'll see a reversal just like we did in the United States.
Well, remember, I think some of the Western liberals had this idea that Western liberalism would decompose and sort of absorb Islamic communities in these countries. And I think
how's that work out?
I think there is some evidence it has done some of that, but also that, like the first generation, but they're showing that the second or third generation of like Muslims are going back to Islam. Mm-hmm. All right. So, and part of the reason I think is Islam's obviously is a false religion. So we have to point that out. But I think it has a communitarian aspect where it actively fights back, all right, against the liberal culture. All right. Whereas a lot of like Protestant or Roman Catholic churches, they're not as militant, if you might say that, and the European.
Well, it's the reason for that is ideological. Ultimately, the Western religions and even Orthodoxy don't have, frankly, violent apostasy laws, which means that you're completely tolerable as a Muslim being a terrible Muslim, a drunkard, and the worst kind of Muslim you could possibly imagine, although it's pretty bad considering what Islam can allow. But in the end, what you can't do is leave, because if you leave, then you're, in many cases, subject to death. This is part of the reason why we see so many honor killings and other such things. So that's the point. It's not that Islam is doing a better job per se. It's that Islam has a better grip on fear.
It's more militant. That's my point.
But it's starting to disappear. Yeah. As you know, I mean, if I've watched a lot of the anti-Islamic apologetic and polemic, and one thing that's constantly pointed out is that internally, you're finding more and more, especially Western Muslims, who stay formally Muslim but don't believe in anything. I'm not sure that either that or the totally disaffected Westerner is, I guess you could say, the target demographic we should be referring to, but I think ultimately the youth need to be reminded in the power of God and the miraculous, as opposed to purely semantic arguments.
Well, in the West, the you don't have any backbone in your humanism, and the humanism doesn't have the guts to stand up against a religion where people are willing to die for their faith. Humanism doesn't have
for
that.
their faith too, you know. I mean, well, yeah, but I'm not. That's my point. I'm not advocating for humanism. I'm not advocating for liberalism. I think they need to be destroyed. Let me see here. Hold on. I've got to go in order. Atomic Lead said the French Enlightenment was papist chickens coming home to roost. The Jesuits used skeptical arguments against Jansenists and Huguenots and shot themselves in the foot.
Yep.
That's probably true, although I do believe that skepticism has its value. Brian the Swede said, agreed, Masons and Illuminists in the West have been actively working to destroy Christianity for centuries. We should not be surprised when it happens. And you mentioned him earlier, Vladika, but Basil P. says, been a while.
Hello.
And he says, have you guys found any new at Filio interpretations?
Go to the
interpolations?
Okay, go to the very beginning of the screen and
the beginning. We're
John
going to make
Mason
a separate
Neal's book.
cut, most likely. Yeah, if you look in John Mason Neal, we found some more. Also, it seems to be substantially taking its arguments from von Sarnikov, so definitely worth it.
I wanted to add one point too, is that with the dissolution of the backbone of Western culture, and it's like compared to the Bolshevik time and communism, that when atheism was growing, of course, since there's no God, there's a vacuum, the people were turning to Spiritism. And so I went out a couple weeks ago to wear my cassock out at a big event in Lakeland. And so I go around and show a Christian presence as a witness. And it's a Friday night event. They call it First Friday, where all the vendors are out, and thousands of people attended in the center square in Lakeland. And
First Friday,
and so
really?
They call it the First Friday. Yeah, I know it's comparable to the Catholic, but no, it's a business event. So it's just for business and to generate revenue for all the open businesses and stay open on the Friday night. So anyway, I go there and I intermingle with the people and I walk around and see if anyone will grab me for a conversation or whatever. And so what I noticed is that it was like Halloween. There's a lot of people with their tattoos and dark attire, a lot of black, a lot of the tattoos and things like that. And so, what you have is a rise of, per se, occultism. So since the public schools are denying religion, you have generations now of youth that are afraid to talk about religion in the public school system. I know because I was a teacher in the Polk County school system for 3 months, and then I made my escape. But but anyway, I would talk about the Lord as much as I oftentimes, but the kids were saying they're afraid to speak about religion because the teachers have threatened them. So you've got generations of kids that are afraid to talk. But where do they go? They go into Spiritism. And so now, when I wear my cassock out there, some of the best compliments that I get is from the youth. They go, "Oh, that's really cool looking," And it's like, I guess you're a Darth Vader style superhero walking around in this black robe. And it's like, oh, okay, really cool, man. But anyway, but what you see is,
cross, right?
Yes, with a big cross. That's right. Mine is, it shines good. So anyway, so however, though, that's not a lot of interest. I really don't, but I get a little, and so we're up against it because you've got a generation that has not been schooled in any religion, but is now occult, spiritistic, nihilistic, stuff like that. And so, that's where we're at. And that's what we're dealing with. But there is a vacuum. And every now and then I'll get in a good conversation with people. And it's the young people that are potentially, our target audience per se, because they are looking for something solid. And I could solicit your prayers and just say, pray for me as I go out on these nights once a month. But anyway, that's what I'm observing, and it's serious. and it's the dark world out there, and we're bringing the light, and we have it. And so anyway, there you go.
No, well, we appreciate that, and Father Boniface, I completely agree, especially about the youth. Atomic Lead writes, there was a huge occult revival starting in the mid to late 19th century. We're definitely going to get to the same thing if we're not already in the midst of it. Absolutely. I think that it's been ongoing. I don't think that there's any doubt that it's being pushed in the school system, in the media. It's been.
Well, remember that. I'm sorry to interrupt, but all these programs you see on YouTube, or I don't really watch television, so I'm just going off what's on YouTube. Maybe it has some reflection on television.
And no one watches television anymore.
Okay, things like ghost hunters. Okay, people's spirit bot, all this stuff that really came from the late 19th
paranormal stuff.
Exactly. That's sort of a safe, quote unquote, spiritual outlet people find they can use, but it ultimately leads to darker things. All right, people using Ouija boards and such, which is a demonic outlet for infiltration. Because I think part of the reason is sort of the old 19th century, and then it's various incarnate manifestations of spiritism and so-called spiritualism, is that it doesn't really. I mean, a lot of it's very Masonic in nature. All right, like Rosicrucianism is just proto-Masonry. Okay. And then there's who was Julius Evola, was sort of like the spiritist, or sort of like the esoteric Mason on the right. They found all kinds of ways of bringing this in. There was Santerio is one of the other things among some of the Caribbeans, but no, there's a lot of this esotericism that I think it finds some way to grow. Because people don't like the words of Christ, let's say in the Gospel of John, that I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me. All right, that's extremely exclusive. That's the facts. All right, but if you can talk about how you had a séance and you heard from your grandmother and everything's fine and you don't really need to believe in the Lord or what have you, I think people feel comforted. It's a false comfort, though.
Yeah. And ultimately, that's part of what we have to kind of expose. And then let's see here. There's some more comments. Basil P writes, true, although it seems more shallow now, I think there will need to be some decline of American cultural projection and a shift in scientific outlook. Once that happens, I suspect we'll see an implosion of occultism that is robust and terrifying. Well, maybe, and I think we've got to be
occultism. An explosion, okay.
Explosion, yeah.
Okay, not
implosion. Right. Well, I mean, I say push for implosion.
I think you're seeing a human sacrifice. Let's say with the occultism, abortion is occultism. I mean, it's a blood sacrifice of human lives, and I've seen the personnel of abortion clinics in front of the clinics making occultic incantations and signs. I've seen it with my own eyes.
They do that.
Well, remember the BLM riots, the BLM organizations. One of the reasons it was very difficult to find this information for sometimes they intentionally obscured it, but at the very beginning, whenever they would have a BLM protest, there would be an invocation of West African deities. They would pour out drink offerings. The two lesbian Marxists who invented the organization are into like West African. It's basically voodoo, is what it is. That's voodoo is the name for West African paganism transplanted to Haiti, what have you.
Right.
So I mean, there's a lot of that stuff going on. Okay, continue, Father.
So what you have is, of course, that in the Jewish sector, you've had rabbis offering up blood sacrifices of human beings. You have this kind of thing taking place in the abortion clinics, but also you have this mindset to offer up humanity as a sacrifice in order to achieve a higher agenda of a sacrifice to Satan. And so I believe that you have now a genocidal movement, I would say, in the Ukraine and also in Palestine, where these people are just being offered up to achieve an agenda of financial gain, and at the cost of human life, which these people think that, well, we're going to sacrifice you for our agenda, and it doesn't matter. And so you have a mindset in the world, and let's say in the American government, where we can sacrifice people to achieve our agenda. So we sacrifice the unborn, we sacrifice the elderly, we sacrifice our army, we sacrifice our people's finances to achieve our agenda. And basically, if we have to, if some people, if lives are taken to achieve our agenda, then that's what must take place.
Their agenda, yeah. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, I said mine maybe, but it's like their agenda. I'm speaking in for them in a way, but excuse me.
Right,
But
it's almost sort of like they're going to sacrifice everybody but themselves.
Yeah,
Notice
that's
that. It's others. Yes, yeah, so Father Boniface points. It's others have to be sacrificed so that you can have this, so you can continue, you can live. You know,
right, exactly.
It's never those people sacrificing themselves, because if they had an attitude where they have to put themselves first in danger,
that's right.
Then that would be a totally different environment. All right,
well,
that's sort of the old classical environment Christian society had, where the leaders and the people who were in charge had to you know, like the noblesse oblige, you know, sort of a medieval idea, where the noble class or the priest, they had to put themselves as in danger before others. All right, and that comes from Christ, obviously. He, you know, who wants to be first, you know, will be last. All right, exactly. But it's just like the abbot. Yeah, like for example, in the Rule of Saint Benedict, an abbot was called the servant of the servants of God. Now, the papacy later took that term over and, you know, kind of messed it up a little. Yeah, well, I mean, later. But my point is still, as Father Boniface points out, others have to be sacrificed for someone, for you, or, you know, the evil, the leader, to continue to live. But look, that goes back to in many ways to the, like ancient pagan cultures, like the worship of Moloch, all right, or Chemosh, or the Rephaim, etc., where they offered the children as sacrifice for a good harvest. They did that in Northern Europe. The attempts have been made to deny it, but they have found the sacrificial pits in Denmark and in Sweden and in Germany. I mean, by the way, the Latin Romans did human sacrifice by their own admission as late as the 3rd century BC. They sort of stopped doing it as sort of a reaction to the Carthaginians. But even as late as like 100 BC, there was some, or 120 BC, there was some catastrophe, and the Romans took a bunch of Greek and Gallic slaves and buried them alive in the Forum as an appeasement to Mars. All right. Wow. So it's you know, it's not too far off, even
from what they were doing
before the coming of Christ and the preaching of the gospel, that these societies were engaging in these things. And it's remember the Israelites and then the later Jews practiced human sacrifice, even though they were commanded not to do that. All right. They were explicitly condemned in doing that. So it's like this is a recurring thing that happens unless you have some strong, powerful moral force, which generally has been the church, incorporated in society, and if it's not the Orthodox Church, it's at least something that tries to present an analog to it, like a schism, like, you know, what have you, Protestant and Roman Catholicism. At one point, trying to present a moral force to restrain these things. All right, and if that restraining moral force doesn't exist, and of course it has to use at some point violence against evil. All right. Mm-hmm. That's going to have to happen. If that does not exist, if that force does not subsist and exist in society, then you will have these more nefarious powers, the demonic powers, that will gradually surface. And this is sort of goes back to St. John Chrysostom's commentary on St. Paul's words, that which restrains. All right.
Right.
St. John Chrysostom interprets it as lawful of moral authority restraining. It's not just the Roman Empire, it's lawful moral authority restraining evil in society. All right, because even if you make comparisons, like the 2nd century Stoic Roman emperor, who still persecuted the church in various terms, was still, the church fathers still considered them, you know, they would have been considered, you know, paradisical rulers in comparison to some of the people we have today. All right. That's seriously how bad the situation is. So,
well, in Maui, with the fires in Maui, you have even civil leaders now, and it looks the scenario is actually horrific, where the leadership is saying they're not worried about all the deaths now. They want to build themselves a paradise. So it's like, hey, we got rid of some of the people here now because we want to build an amusement park. I mean, I'm just kind of saying it.
and didn't you have people burned to death and their kids burned to death in their houses? I mean, it was just
absolutely. I know.
I mean,
Yeah.
And it's like, and so now you've got, I just was looking at the news where you've got a senator or a state representative in New York who wants to shut down all the pro-life pregnancy centers. And so they're really coming out in the open now, and they're getting more aggressive. And so that's something serious to look at. So you've got so not only you have the abortion, you've got all the euthanasia in America. Now it's becoming outright where we've got a fire in Maui, let's say and they even had one representative of the government over there saying, well, the gods of Hawaii are basically, okay, it just needs to be done. And so they're ignoring all the death that took place. It's horrific. And so you have this growing aggressive spirit in the world, but it's at our doorstep too. For sacrifices being made for the sake of, let's say, financial gain, and the vision of a utopia society where we can, build an amusement park at the expense of all the people who died there. I mean, I'm exaggerating, but it's like, hey, this is what's taking place, and so yeah, it's
once a society accepts abortion, then everything else is going to follow.
Yeah,
once
yeah.
you accept you can kill the unborn, then everything from killing the elderly, mentally handicapped, that's all going to, in babies 2 years old after birth, and it's all going to follow. Because if you can ensconce abortion as a fundamental value in your culture or your society, right, then you have given yourself over to evil that is very difficult to come back from.
Right. Now, Brian the Swede writes, Degenerate Flix, I assume he's talking about Netflix, is almost all occultism as the choice religion. Yeah, I've noticed that a lot of new television shows, movies, etc., that basically they're trying to push the occult, especially on the viewing public. Atomic Lead writes, they're already creating homunculi via artificial wombs and youth potions, like with adrenochrome. And I would not disagree in either one. I think the artificial wombs are even I think there's more sinister stuff. There are laws, I mean, there used to be, or there were laws in place that sort of thing, would be used to medically assist women, but we all know how things are going now. And
almost all technology that's created to sort of like, oh, they're going to fund this technology to help somebody. It's never going to be used like that.
It's always something much more menacing
for example,
and deceitful.
I was reading about a few weeks ago about improvements in an artificial kidney. Like they have artificial kidneys. They're just hemodialysis machines are humongous, right?
Right. Yeah.
Well, the concept is, could they create an artificial kidney that you could implant attached to your already dysfunctioning kidney, or just as a replacement? But I wonder if that does happen, where will this ultimately lead? Because a lot of it seems to be going not. I mean, obviously, you have people who have malfunctioning organs and what have you, and because of diseases that what have you. But I oftentimes wonder, is a lot of this going toward the idea that they're going to gradually replace all of your body parts with machines? All right. So what's going to be left of you? So
then you'll be immortal. You'll be immortal. You just need a parts change.
That's the idea, but
that's what they claim. But you see, I think that you're right, Father. I think that's you're right. People, their view of life is it's just a material process that exists in this world. So they have to do whatever they can to keep themselves going. Because they view once their brain ends, then they cease to exist. Although I wonder, I think deep down there's also a fear of judgment. all right, in their content
Absolutely.
somewhere. So they're trying to postpone it as much as possible. I mean, look, even if you have the technology to live for 1,000 years or 2,000 years, you're going to live only to the time of Antichrist and then the Last Judgment. You're not going to escape this. All right.
Yeah, there's no way around it.
And remember, last time humans lived to 900 years as an average age, we ended up creating such a situation where God had to drown the planet. All right, because it was so wicked. All right. So, you look at the antediluvian society, from what we can gather from it, from the mentions in the early chapters of Genesis, people lived to be 950 on average. All right. But what did men use at that time? They, used it to produce such great wickedness. All right. They didn't use their 900 years of life for repentance and love of God and neighbor. They used it for something so horrible that God had no choice but to destroy the all of civilization and almost all animal life except what Noah carried on the ark. That's all.
Well, one thing we do want to be is kind of, for lack of a better word, realistic in terms of what science fiction scenarios they can create. I mean, the reality is they haven't really broken that 120-year barrier. There's nothing that indicates that they will anytime soon. Ultimately, we're just prosthetically replacing parts. Just like Atomic Lead wrote, there's been the concept of full-body prosthetics since the 80s, Ghost in the Shell at least. I mean, you can go back to Darth Vader, because basically his entire body was replaced by a robot. But the point is, at that point, are you really you anymore? And that's the real question that needs to be asked. There's talk now of trying to digitally copy people's memories and keep them alive as AI programs. But that's not them. That's just a series of programs you've put into a machine that will sound like a decent impression of you, perhaps, but it's not you. You're dead. You're done. It's like, so realistically, I feel like I don't want to give in too much into the fantasies of the globalists that are trying to kill us, because I don't believe that they can accomplish a lot of the things that they say, and I think that they're being kind of deceptive about it.
Well, look at the predictions from the 50s, 60s, and 70s of where society would be technologically. How many of them turned out to be true? I don't think anybody expected things like the internet. Or that's almost like it came out of nowhere, like the internet and the way we understand it. All right.
Yeah. Well,
you look back in the 1920s; they were predicting the revolution of technology would be like free, like almost like Nikola Tesla stuff, like free electricity. All right. Well, that never came to material fruition.
Well, I think the part of it is that I strangely, a lot of the early predictions, actually, some of them did actually come true. Like, I know that the internet, like, kind of the basis for it, the ARPANET, etc. This stuff had existed since the 50s and the 60s.
Yeah, but they didn't visualize it in the sense that we're using things like radio.
No, that's my point. They did the unintended consequences. So, in that sense, could in theory the world have free electricity? There's probably enough abundant energy that it could theoretically be done. But it's just like, take the case of solar, for example. In Africa, there's a lot of sunlight. So you would think, hey, if you set up a bunch of solar panels in Africa, it'll work out great. Well, they've already thought that through, so they rent the solar panels out to Africans, so that there's always someone making money off the deal.
Father Joseph, they rent the solar panels out here. We've tried to buy we've contacted suppliers and said, look, we want to buy solar panels. We don't want to rent them. We want to buy them to put on the roof of the monastery. And we could, they say, no, we only rent because we got to replace the argument they use is that every year or 2 years they improve in quality by 50%. So therefore, we just want to rent them out to you. All right.
Why not just buy them from like Harbor Freight or something? I have some solar stuff.
If you can send us the information,
I'll send you a link. Right. Brian the Sweet says the noose cannot be virtualized. 100%. That's correct. Wicked Wally. Hey, Wicked Wally, a crossover from the Crucible. Oh, hey there. He said the Catholic Church is about to drop the ball again if they force through all the liberal nonsense they're looking to at the Synod. Well, don't discount that possibility.
Well, don't worry. Whoopi Goldberg had a meeting with the Pope, so
yeah, of course. That she's a very important church functionary, and so
I'm sure Guinan gave him advice.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's a predictable. Now, Atomic Lead said, "I want my flying car." Well, good luck with that. I know that the Terra Fugia has been in development hell for the past decade, and there are other types of semi-flying cars, but ultimately. Yeah, they're not gonna make that legal anytime soon because of just all the problems that will come with it. you're kind of better off just getting like a hang glider or something. But in any case, yeah. So let me see here. I'm checking to see if we've missed any comments or as I as it's a live call in, so anyone can call in using the link in the top of the chat in blue. If you have questions, comments, you want to say something here, and we got Wicked Wally again. Whoopi couldn't even comprehend games not working on her iMac. I read somewhere, I forget who it was. I think it was John Carter on Substack, where he basically was talking about how a lot of these globalists they're kind of getting up there in age. They're like in their 90s and stuff. And a lot of their dreams of becoming immortal were originally in all their plans. Originally, like things were like in 2050 as opposed to 2030. And the reason they're trying to quote unquote speed up everything is because, quite frankly, they can't handle new technology. They've opened a Pandora's box and they don't know what to do with it. And so ultimately, yeah, I think we're going to see more confusion on this, and it's going to be kind of funny over time. I think we'll see. I mean, everything was funny until this whole war started in the Middle East. And the Ukraine war wasn't funny either, but the point is it was, I just don't know how things are going to go. I'm going to be honest. If anyone wants to call in, again, you can use the link at the top of the chat. Okay, so we are at 1 hour and we're at the 1 hour and 20 minute mark, and so let me see here if I can take these banners off. And so let me think what else is going on. Let's see. I mean, did you have any other topics that you wanted to discuss, Father Boniface?
No, I'm good.
All right.
God bless you. I'll sign off.
No problem. Thank you, and you have a great night, and you enjoy.
Thanks.
All right. Thanks. And they were good questions too. We're probably going to make some shorts out of those. Okay. And so let me see here. Again, if anyone wants to come on, they are welcome to. It is a live call-in session, or if you just want to make a comment in the chat and have us respond, that's also possible. You may have noticed that I've been putting out requests for support lately. I am going to go into a little bit more detail about that, and I will probably turn that into a bit of a.
Okay, back.
Oh, you're back? Okay.
Could Atomic Lead go further into his mention about the Jesuits' use of skepticism against the Huguenots and the?
Yeah, I mean,
I remember other. Well, he doesn't have to. I mean, he could just comment if he wants to, because I remember of the other poll. When we had our conversation with him, mentioned that there were issues with how, like, the Counter-Reformation Roman Catholic apologists and polemicists argue against Protestantism. That some of their the methods of argumentation of schools of thought they adopted, in fact, influenced and contributed to in the Enlightenment. I mean, even if they didn't intend that. So that's something that's actually kind of an interesting thought, because I think by skepticism, I think they mean. I think they may have a different meaning than just let's just check the manuscripts or what have you.
No, I think it was hold on. The Atomic Lead wrote. There's an article on this. Okay. I'll find it in just a moment. So yeah, we'll be looking forward to that.
Okay.
Okay. The only other news I have here on my end while we wait for that is again I've started a GiveSendGo. I don't know if I should just read the presentation to explain it.
Bring it up on the visual side and read it.
Okay, no, not a problem. Give me a moment. Okay, one moment here. Okay, I'm just going to read what I got here because it's good if everyone knows what we're trying to do and what ultimately is happening. I want to give you kind of like I've decided I'm just going to be kind of open about what's going on here. Okay. I'll skip the intro where it says my name's Father Joseph Suaidan. You all know that. NFT, you all know that. Gavin Twitter, you all know that. We've been providing news and apologetical work from a true Orthodox Christian perspective for years. In May of this year, I participated in a public debate on a much larger YouTube channel than ours. The debate had a snowball effect everywhere. We went from relative obscurity to getting weekly requests for missionary assistance. My bishop and metropolitan decided that if I was going to represent our synod, I should be elevated to the priesthood. We all know this part. So I'm going to skip that part. But basically, I started thinking in terms of making it like full-time missionary and apologetical work. This is where I'm going to have to get a little bit more into what's going on in my life here.
Go ahead.
In April of this year, I changed my legal name, created by a paperwork error in my grandfather's immigration to France, back to my traditional family name, Suaidan. I spelled it as Suaidan for 19 years. Slight difference. There's a link in the GiveSendGo to the explanation as to why the slight difference. Because of the annoyances of changing my name, I changed it first with my bank in June, and then with human resources at my job in July. A day later, managers at my job of almost 2 years were asking who was the new person in the group chat. The next morning, I was fired. In May, I was the top customer reviewed representative in the department. 2 months later, I was applying for unemployment while looking for work. In the process, I found myself helping more people come to the Orthodox faith, and God has given me experiences I never would have imagined as recently as January. Driving across states, baptisms, catechesis, and I followed the rules, applying for work and waiting on a decision from PA Unemployment. They denied me September 12th, and I've discovered this week it's on a false basis, but basically I was told I'd have to sue. Bills piled up. I began asking for donations, and people helped us get through, for whom I offer prayers every service in my home chapel. It seems the more I do, the harder the bills get. To make matters worse, I switched auto insurance companies. A month later, my insurance company canceled me without ever sending me a cancellation or even a bill. When I called to pay my bill, it turns out I was a few days late, and they told me they canceled me. They have a sister company, however, and offered to insure me that way. All was fine until I got a letter from the PA Department of Motor Vehicles effectively saying I had to turn in my registration if I was without insurance and driving. You must sign an affidavit saying you did not drive the car during the uninsured period with a fine and or jail time if you're lying. Having no choice but to let the time elapse, I've since been informed I can skip the penalty for almost $700, or I can give up my car's plates on the 2nd of November for 3 months. I firmly believe there are no such things as coincidences, and that's why I'm here asking for help on GiveSendGo. I've seen so many stories of lives changed through GiveSendGo that I always thought of it as a back pocket solution for people in case of an emergency. Well, now it's a state of emergency for us. So here goes. May our Lord richly bless you. Basically, I didn't expect any of what would happen over the past few months, and it has been amazing, but sometimes terrifying. And ultimately, when I've gone out to the point of kind of asking for money on the internet, I'm not doing it because I just want, all sorts of stuff. But in any case, yeah, South Padre Tony writes, yeah, nothing like a good old victimless crime. Yeah, ultimately you can't win because I was out of insurance for I think 9 or 10 days. I called in to pay the bill, and the next thing you know, they're like, no, we canceled you, but we'll sign you up to another company. I'm like, oh, so I've lost my insurance with one company. It's the same company, but I'm getting my insurance back, and you reported me. So then the Department of Motor Vehicles wants you to sign an affidavit saying you didn't drive the car. But how can I sign that? What if they have a camera next to my house? And then it's a fine and jail time. Like, I can't risk that. And so, yeah, it's pretty sad. Let me see here what we've got here.
Could we look at Atomic Lead's comment?
Yep. I'm doing it right now. Found it. Skepticism and the Counter-Reformation in France by Richard H. Popkin. I don't know if you found that link or anything.
I'll look it up after the show.
Okay. David Hume also mentioned that he was just using the Jesuits' arguments against Jansenist miracles against all miracles. That's an interesting way to look at it, I guess. I've not studied that very carefully, but I definitely will now. Might actually be useful.
This must have been old. This was old 17th century Roman Catholicism, where they sort of used to argue. Like, I mean, obviously as Orthodox, we would, I don't think have you noticed? How am I supposed to? I'm stumbling over my words. Never mind.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Could both F and B, Father and Bishop, share their thoughts on the Georgian Orthodox Church? They seem to be the one patriarchate that is and has, at least since leaving the WCC, been a beacon of light against ecumenism. Oh boy, sorry to disappoint you in a minute. Atomic Lead says I put a link there. I don't know if I can see it. Let me see if I can get from the YouTube channel and see if I can find it, because in StreamYard I don't see it. But give me just a moment while I take a look here.
I found it. It's from the Anglican.audio, Skepticism of the Counter-Reformation by Richard. Yeah, I'll put it in the private chat if you don't find it.
Okay. Yeah, I can share it that way.
Okay.
One moment. Okay. Let me increase the size and switch over. Okay, so I've got it up here. So basically, let me see here. This exploration into the Counter-Reformation in France will attempt to explain one of the oddest developments of this period, the alliance of the most Orthodox Catholics with the most skeptical followers of Montaigne in a common crusade against Calvinism. Some recent studies in the history of French theology after the Council of Trent point out that the prevailing currents of Catholic theory were primarily negative and Augustinian, and were more against scholasticism, rationalism, and Calvinism than for any systematic and coherent intellectual defense of the faith. What I shall examine is an important side of this chapter in intellectual history that has been rather neglected, the relationship between the revival of the Greek skeptical theory, Pyrrhonism, and the strategy and theory of Counter-Reformation among many of the dynamic leaders at the time. Although this paper will be largely narrative in character, I will also attempt to develop an explanation for the strange tale that is to be told. This does look like a really interesting article.
Okay, yeah. Well, it'd be interesting. I'll read through it, and we can maybe talk about it next time.
Yeah, we can,
because it's 30 pages.
We're not reading that today, but yeah, definitely we could probably pick this up next week, and we'll definitely look at it atomically. So yeah, stay tuned. We'll definitely do one. Give me just one moment here, and okay, so I'm gonna take that off. But okay, so yeah, actually that's kind of interesting for me. I'm actually going to go through that article because if everything works out, I'm going to be doing a debate with an atheist tomorrow, and actually this is going to be part of my argument. So I'm going to definitely want to see how this back and forth was addressed then, and how one would respond to it now.
The Georgian Church issue.
Yeah, let's get back to that. Okay, so the Georgian Church, here's the problem. On the one hand, yes, they are out of the WCC. That's true. Since they've left the WCC, Patriarchal Leah has been a pretty good conservative, even if it's kind of that old Sovietized conservative that we're talking about. Definitely he did good things for the Georgian birthrate. That said, I'm not sure how committed those outside of his circle in the Georgian Patriarchate are to anti-ecumenism. Because if we remember, he wasn't committed to it at all to begin with. The reason that he left the WCC was because a large number of the monasteries were threatening to go into schism and break off and join the true Orthodox. And many of them, not believing him, did. And so that's part of the reason why there are a number of true Orthodox groups that exist in Georgia, even though the Hakna is often mentioned as the largest. I don't know if that's even true anymore. It's scattered among different groups now. But what's more important ultimately is that even if he stays committed to being anti-ecumenist, it's clear that people coming out of the seminaries, newer bishops, etc., are kind of taking the position that they're going to go right back into the WCC as soon as he dies. So, I can't possibly imagine that we're supposed to pin all our hopes on one extremely old patriarch. What is he? He's like 94 or something?
He's old.
Yeah, and the point is he can barely walk, and even there's every other year, or even every year, there's talk of some foiled assassination attempt on him. The simple reality is, if this is, when we talk about anti-ecumenism in the church, we're talking about having, a robust body of people willing to fight ecumenism. There should be a bunch of anti-ecumenists in the hierarchy of the Georgian Patriarchate. I don't see that. As much as I'd like to believe it, I don't believe it, because it seems like what we're actually seeing in the rank and file, in the seminaries, and in a lot of the stuff that's coming out, these people are basically looking at, Patriarchal Leah as kind of a relic, for lack of a better word. So, I mean, that's my thoughts. I don't know how you feel about it, Lidika. I know that even our synod has had some involvement with them in the distant past, but yeah, I don't know. What's your feeling?
Well, they did produce that anti-ecumenical statement back in 2001 or 2000, was it so? The problem was that, I mean, there are other problems, but one of the main problems was that, and this is something I pointed out to Vladika John in 2011, and he didn't even know about. But the former secretary of their synod during all that discussion basically said in a later interview that we had to say this anti-ecumenical stuff because we were afraid of people leaving us, and we just had to basically lie through our teeth.
Wow.
Which was shocking because I guess Vladika John had known people. He had thought that they had been sincere about this back in 2000. All right.
A lot of people thought he was sincere.
Yeah, I mean, and they were like, well, this is maybe there's some positive movement here, but because look, I guess from the perspective of if you're going to have one of these autocephalous church institutions that are going to get taken over by ecumenists, the Georgian church looks like it would have been the one that would happen simply because, look, they're all the way out there in the Caucasus Mountains. They're sort of, even by Soviet standards, they were sort of cut off from, European culture. All right. They also had a small population. And how many people live on Cyprus, for example? I mean, I think they're more than the Cypriot church. So if you have a small body like that, I think they had maybe 900 actual church buildings or church communities in the entire country. So, that was why it was such a dangerous situation for the ecumenists, because many of the ecumenists in the World Orthodoxy 99, 2000 were actually afraid that they had a problem on their hands. All right. Which is why Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew vigorously intervened behind the scenes and not just behind the scenes, in front, to disrupt any type of nascent anti-ecumenism. The other problem is, remember, the Georgians sort of have this claim where back in 1990-91, they stated that they couldn't find their original tomos. I don't know why they went down this path, but they claimed they couldn't find their tomos of autocephaly. And the Phanar claimed, well, only the Phanar can grant autocephaly. Because the original claim of the Georgian church was that the Church of Antioch, around like 720 or 730, had formally granted some sort of document of autocephaly, which was actually recognizing the fact that the Georgian church had been autocephalous for centuries before. All right.
How do you lose that kind of document?
Well, I mean, look, how many people have their documents from like the 700s? How many, or does anyone have the original consecration certificate for St. Gregory the Great? All right. You got to think that we have copies of the Bible and patristic manuscripts and maybe some imperial documents, very few. I think you do have some documents from the 10th century that are like mandates, golden bulls, etc., from the emperor or what have you. But you have this weird situation where the Georgian church was acknowledged as being autocephalous, and then suddenly the Phanars in the 1990s like, you can't produce any document. So it didn't matter what we said for the past 1,200 years. You're not really autocephalous. So they accepted a second tomos of autocephaly from the Phanar. All right.
Wow.
Which, I don't think it helped their situation.
No.
So anyway, I haven't seen anything out of the Georgian church. I mean, remember, Ilya had his meeting with Pope Francis. All right. They prayed together in the cathedral in Tbilisi. So these are not necessarily figures who, like you said, a lot of these are old Soviet type, quote unquote, conservatives. All right. They may not be like liberal modernists in the sense of like El Podorferos, trying to promote gay marriage.
Right.
But that's also another problem, because remember, you're going to have in these former Marxist-Leninist countries that were dominated by them, opposition to gay marriage, simply because Marxist-Leninism, by the way, was opposed to homosexuality. All right, they would have considered it, Leninists and Stalinists would have considered it to be like a reactionary bourgeoisie, blah, 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 blah. I mean, they're not entirely wrong, and there is a lot of truth to the reality of it being a decadence. But then again, these Leninist and Stalinist states gave in on abortion as well. So that's why you have this strange situation where in like the Russian Federation, the government pays for abortions. They have, a 12-week abortion ban, which has barely been able to scratch the surface. because you can get a doctor's note or approval to have an abortion after 12 weeks. It's almost like the claim that that in Israel they have these heavy abortion regulations, whereas in the state of Israel you have to go through a termination committee, and like 99% of the cases are approved. It's not too dissimilar in Russia, and it's just not me saying that because I'm like true Orthodox. You can find Moscow Patriot pro-life activists that complain about this problem, how they will try to get some. I mean, I remember back in 2022 there was an attempt to seriously remove abortion from being paid by the state insurance in Russia, and it was defeated by like 2/3 of the Duma. All right, so even when Patriarch Kirill was like campaigning for having, it was just having abortion removed from the government list of services. They couldn't even get that. So it's sort of like a lot of these countries like Georgia and what have you. I mean, but look, they have done statistics in Georgia on the abortion issue where something like 55 or 60% of the population of women and 70% of men want to make abortion illegal, but it never happens for some weird reason. Just like I've seen similar statistics in Russia where they have like a bare majority that would want a general abortion ban, but it just never seems to manifest in the Duma for whatever reason. Because you still have a lot of these, believe it or not, old liberals, and who collaborate with sort of old Soviet types who are first wave feminists that want things like abortion to still remain legal. And part of it's probably because most of the women in these countries have had abortions, and they feel they have to justify their behavior and activities. But back to Georgia, no, I don't think you're going to have anything big happen.
Yeah, I think
it's unfortunate. It's just I don't think that's going to transpire. So, I mean, if I'm proven wrong, great.
Well, here's I want to get the other question up because it's important. So, would the monasteries revolt upon his death if they attempt to join the WCC? South Padre Tony writes, one can hope and pray. And so, can we predict an exodus en masse once Elia passes away? Will the monastics revolt if ecumenical?
Well, remember after the original trouble happened in 2001 to 2003, when Ilya and others had removed from the WCC, and they made this sort of kind of very general anti-ecumenical statement. All right, what happened to all those abbots? Well, they suddenly got removed.
Yep.
All right, they got deposed. Some of them tried to, because you're right, they could leave after they got deposed, and many of them did and joined true Orthodox churches. But you have that stigma of like, oh, he just left because he got deposed, which was not true at all. So they put new people in charge of these places, I think.
No, absolutely. That's true. That's what happened with the Holy Mountain. I mean, basically Esphigmenou was the last man standing, but there were other monasteries that were against them. They were removed. I was just looking at the Esphigmenou page earlier. I can even bring that
because
up.
Here's the problem. Whenever I'm throughout the past, and same thing with other people, we're tempted to say, well, maybe there's some sort of improvement in one of these patriarchates. Something terrible happens, and they just like destroy any goodwill or credibility they have created. All right. So someone will point out to supposedly an anti-ecumenical approach that Patriarch Kirill was making, and then suddenly the Havana meeting and declaration happens. All right. And it turns out a lot of the anti-ecumenical statements they were attributing to him were out of context. And, it was just, in some cases, just entirely invented. And in places like Moscow, they will lie about why the patriarch does something. For example, up to in the lead up to the Havana Declaration and the Havana meeting, all right. And there is nobody who reads the Havana Declaration that can justify that on any dogmatic or theological terms. It is simply heretical humanism. All right. So what were they doing? They were preparing people in Moscow by claiming that Pope Francis really wanted to convert to Orthodoxy, and he was afraid of how to do it. So he had to consult with Patriarch Kirill. That was sort of how they prepared people for the meeting. All right. Well, that's obviously a lie. All right. It never happened. It's just as much of a lie as these claims that this Metropolitan Elias of Mount Lebanon was receiving visions and directing Stalin during the Patriotic War. All right. And that's to justify Sergianism, all right? Or, the claim that Patriarch Demetrius of Constantinople in the 1980s was secretly an anti-ecumenist, and he just needed more help, and you had to stay with him, and I mean, it's just none of it came out to be true.
Well, one thing, that's one thing that we have to talk about, because this has been brought up before, is that the 1920 encyclical was not well known outside of Constantinople for the first years after it came out. Because even the first decades.
Well, remember, there was no patriarch technically when it was written. It was written by the the locum tenens of the group of the inner synod that they wrote the document. Right.
And so basically, like, if you look here at this at the chronology of Esphigmenou here, what we're talking about, in 1972, it points out that they raised the black flag. Well, in 1971, they had a special session of the governing body of Mount Athos. And basically, it was convened that they basically resolved on the question of whether to resume the commemoration of the ecumenical patriarchate. So each holy monastery was given the right to decide whether or not they would commemorate the ecumenical patriarchate after what happened with Vatican II and the lifting of the anathemas. And so, along with others, the monastery of Esphigmenou continued to operate under the 1971 resolution, but not long after, Abbot Andreas and Abbot Eudokimos of the monasteries of St. Paul and Xenophontos, who were also against commemorating the patriarchate, were removed and exiled and replaced with hand-picked appointees, which basically led to the increasing isolation of Esphigmenou as we have it today, where they're literally under siege, they're under blockade, they have no access to outside food, electricity, etc. They're basically forced to be self-reliant. If they try to pick their own crops, they'll get killed. And we hear people going, well, they're not really the monks there. No, they're really the monks there. There's an imposter brotherhood that was set up about, what was it, like 7 years ago or 10 years ago?
1 second, Father. Go back up. If you see where it says in 1971, so a special session of the governing representative body of Mount Athos, which was convened, presumably the assembly of the Kyries. Right. So this special session resolved that what? On the issue of resuming the commemoration of the ecumenical patriarchate, each holy monastery as a self-governing entity is to remain free to choose a course of action according to its conscience.
Yep.
Along with others, the monastery of Esphigmenou continued to operate under the 1971 resolution, but not long after the Abbot Andreas and Abbot Eudokimos of St. Paul and Xenophontos monasteries, who also remained faithful to the resolution, were removed and exiled by the patriarchate and replaced with hand-picked appointees. And this is in the aftermath, obviously, of the false lifting of the anathemas.
Yeah, that's right. As I had said, and so ultimately, what ends up happening is that Esphigmenou has been isolated for years, and with the recent actions of Patriarch Bartholomew ceding to the Greek government's actions against the monastery, they noted in their last press release last year when Bartholomew was visiting that 25 monks have died since the blockade. That's 25 monks who are on the conscience of Patriarch Bartholomew.
He doesn't care.
Well, I'm just
he
saying.
Has no conscience.
But I want to add that. But to add to that, to those people who think that these people are being unreasonable, or that these people are just not wanting to get along, that they're just irritable personalities, these people are willing to die for orthodoxy. And this is something that is the way we're all supposed to live. So it's something to keep in mind whenever somebody starts talking about elder this or elder what's his face, and they're like, oh, but these people are willing to die for the faith. Unless you're willing to die for the faith, don't talk. Just don't have a comment. And I don't mean you can, and obviously you can have a comment in the chat or questions, comments, concerns. That's not what I mean. But what I mean is you have no moral high ground to stand on. It is important that our orthodoxy always remain heroic. And that's, there's no greater example than that. And it's such a shame. So unfortunately, to answer the Georgia question, I think they'll probably do something like that really, really fast. Some people will leave, but it'll be embarrassing. And people will accuse them of doing it because, it was a legal deposition.
Well, remember also the country, the nation of Georgia is under immense pressure from Western liberal NGOs to promote gay marriage, to do whatever they can to prevent any kind of pro-life law from being passed. Everything is being poured into that country, and they collaborate entirely with Patriarch Bartholomew. There is, in fact, a website called Truth Meter or something. And if you look, like if they say, it's a lie, Myth Detector is the name of the website.
Okay.
And it's dedicated specifically to attacking traditional Georgian society.
Wow, really?
And it's run. It's like a collaboration of the Ecumenical Patriarchate and the European Union. All right.
Wow.
You could find here. Let me find it real quick, and you can look at it.
Yeah, if you could, yeah, definitely. I'll put it on the screen.
Hold on. Okay, I think this is it here. Yeah, Myth Detector JEGE. All right. Like they have here's one of the texts they have. They say it's a myth that Patriarch Bartholomew is for abortion. Well, this is not what anybody said. They didn't say he was personally for abortion.
Right.
Bartholomew is for legalized abortion. It's just the same old line you have from the Democrats and some of the Republicans that they're personally against abortion. It's sort of like someone saying they're personally against grandma having her organs extracted for medical testing. Yeah, you can be personally against it, but are you legally against murder? All right. So, because remember, and they're probably going to say, oh well, it's Russian propaganda trying to keep integration of Georgia into European society. I mean, Georgia's never been part of European society, as far as I can understand. I mean, is Armenia part of European society? I get maybe in some sense. I mean, Georgia and Armenia, those countries, sort of like Eurasian countries more than the Caucasus areas. But my point is, this entire article, it's an example of speaking without trying to present something as being the case, but not really answering anything. All right, sort of like claims that the El Pedorferos is really he's pro-life, but because he spoke at some pro-life conference and then he attacked the pro-life position. All right, so the point is that Georgia is under massive attack. What are they going to do? I mean, they've targeted the country for destruction. So. I mean, God always can work miracles, but I'm saying you have a lot against these people, and the fact that they have been able to utilize the Georgian. Understandably, there was upset at the fact of the war over Abkhazia and South Ossetia. All right, because who has the right to that territory? From the 2008 war. All right, because there were Russians living there. There were people Abkhazians who speak a language like Georgian or is identical to Georgian, but they didn't consider themselves Georgians. Abkhazia did historically have its. I mean, at one point, Abkhazia had its own Catholicate, all right, which is like just short of having a patriarchate. Yeah. So I'm not saying there weren't legitimate problems, but obviously, these smaller Orthodox countries like that, or putative Orthodox countries, will be targeted first. Because they can be destroyed. So I don't see any real grounds. If I am wrong, if Ilya dies and there's like this guy who takes over and he's like this ultra anti-ecumenist,
it's not gonna who's he gonna be?
Exactly who? Right, exactly. I know
he has to exist. So
yeah, exactly. I mean, I just simply don't think it's going to be happening. And remember, I think people in world Orthodoxy who have studied this issue, who are fighting from within types, and they know just as much as I do about this, they would have the same exact analysis. All right, that's why a lot of those figures, I think, will, as you note, Father, will simply give in.
Yeah, now it's Atomically wrote Garden Variety PolitiFact style pill poll.
Yeah.
And we got a response right now. Remember when the members of the Patriarchs joining in on EU meetings in order to bring the country into the EU, which means trouble for the church.
And remember when they had that the average Georgian and even average Georgian priest, all right, in the Patriarchate, they do not like European liberalism. I mean, that's true. They tried to have that gay stuff. And you want to know how people were like, this is barbaric. They were attacking the protesters. And the government was so terrified that the Georgian liberal government knew better than to try to send the police out there to drive back the regular protest, the conservative or the majority normal people. All right, because it probably would have if it probably would have resulted in some sort of revolution in the country as
Absolutely.
it was. But my point is that if you had tried, but I can also theorize if you had tried to hold a gay protest in the United States or England or Canada or Portugal in 1920, you probably would have the exact same thing happen. I mean, Georgia is sort of, to some degree, culturally in some of these issues, basically early 20th, late 19th century, just simply pre-liberalism. All right, they're being eaten away at through media and what have you, but the religious policies also an issue where they're going to attack. Okay, I'm sorry for talking to you.
No, not at all. That's fine. Now we have one more question. We're at the 1 hour 55 mark, so we're probably gonna. This is probably going to be the last question, unless a bunch of new ones come up. Should we accept digital electronic identifications? From Greg 888.
What do they mean by these?
I'm assuming he's talking about like digital IDs. Like they created like the COVID passports and kind of that sort
I
of.
would not take it. I would not accept. I personally would not accept any of that.
Yeah, right. It's one thing we want to keep in mind, and this is important, especially if you are in a first world country like the United States or in Europe. There is a reason when they take your driver's license picture that they use a very high resolution camera. And that reason is for biometrics. They have probably, up until probably Ancestry.com, these countries have the largest biometric databases in the world, and they have a lot of that information. That said, the fact that they do have it, and the fact that that's, some cards even have developed these RFID identifiers on them. If I may, I got this wallet for Christmas. It's a simple wallet. It's like $10. They sell them at a few different places, but you can look it up. RFID wallets. So you can put your cards, even if they have, RFID, even if they have the close range technology, the NFC technology to, tap and go at the store. Once you put it into one of these sleeves, it becomes undetectable. They have a lot of different kinds of wallets of this sort. It goes without saying, please do not insert yourself with a chip. There's the whole, tattoo and, the mark of the beast and all that stuff. Don't do that. I know there are actually people who do that. I've seen people who are sufficiently low IQ that they have put things like barcodes like tattooed on their necks that'll actually scan things like cans of Kool-Aid and stuff like that. The point is, skipping the ridiculous, I would say avoid centralized technologies that record your information, because that information can be used against you. And in terms of the most basic, like your electronic identification, like your ID cards, etc., I'd keep that stuff close to the vest, and that's my opinion.
I'd like to point out that for years there were people, even some Orthodox people, who thought the mark of the beast can't be a literal physical identification mark on the right hand or on the forehead, because they thought that this is too obvious. Nobody would take this mark if there was so. Well, obviously the COVID shot, I do not believe was the mark of the beast. All right, but it was a type
of the mark,
a foreshadowing of it. And what did you find? When people realized that they couldn't go out to their favorite restaurant anymore, they couldn't go out, they couldn't do they had minor inconveniences, or they even had the possibility of losing their job or getting in trouble with their boss, they took the COVID shot, all right, for minor inconveniences. All right, I remember last time I went to the doctor was like a year and a half, 18 months ago. But when I did, or maybe it was 12 months ago, last year, but the nurses, I told them up front, look, I don't want to be asked to take any kind of COVID shot because I'm not going to take one. And the nurse was like, yeah, I agree with you. I didn't want to take it either, but I would have lost my job if I hadn't taken it. All right. And she was like, yeah, it's going to have side effects, but I had to keep my job. All right. So what do people think is going to happen? if there is worldwide catastrophe, war, destruction, and there is some sort of tepidly centralized authority under the Antichrist that's going to say, your bank account's not going to work, your credit cards aren't going to work, you can't work, and we may even execute you, or they will execute you unless you take this mark. I can guarantee you the vast majority, unfortunately, the vast majority of what's left of the population will take that mark. And that's, I think, what the book of Revelation, the fathers point out, which is depressing to find out about. All right.
It's depressing how easily we could be.
Yes, but my point is that it's not that easy to manipulate people. Now, people can argue, well, that's impossible. How could that system last for more than a few years? Well, they're right. It's not going to last for more than a few years. The reign of the Antichrist is not going to be more than, there's a 7-year period, and I think maybe the last 3.5 of that year, he's going to have somewhat of his absolute power, but then it's going to all collapse. You're right. A world government and a dictatorial model or oligarchical model, is not going to last, because you'd think, well, some of those oligarchs would rebel against the Antichrist, which is in fact what happens in the book of Revelation. All right.
Yeah. So Padre Tony says they'll beg for it. Unfortunately, he's
yeah.
probably not wrong. It's as we've seen.
Now, and remember, there will be a mass evangelization of orthodoxy before the coming of Antichrist. The gospel will be preached everywhere, the true gospel. All right. So people will have some sort of sense. They will have had an opportunity to accept the truth. And again, the idea that the sort of like the political realist says, well, you couldn't have a world government for more than a few years. Yeah, right. You're not going to have a world government for more than a few years. So the whole thing is going to collapse it's going to be collapsing even while the Antichrist is reigning over it. All right. So again, I think I would not take any such digital mark, because even you're like, well, it's not the Antichrist mark. Well, that's not a good excuse. It's just because it's not the Antichrist telling you to do it. If it's like some prototype of the Antichrist, that's still not a reason to collaborate. Nor is it a reason to get upset because people don't like hearing about the Antichrist. They don't like hearing preaching about it. They want to seem like they're hip with society, or they're hip with like the establishment conservatives. Because I can tell you, the establishment conservatives are going to go along just as much as the liberals with the Antichrist as well. All right. Everybody from Tucker Carlson to Sean Hannity are going to make that compromise. I mean, if figures like them. All right. Yeah. And you can already see it if you watch even a Tucker Carlson type figure. All right. Where he goes out of his way to even defend liberalism, even if it's like sort of right liberalism, like, oh, we don't care about someone's personal life. I mean, that's the problem. As soon as people started that attitude of, it doesn't matter what you do in your bedroom behind closed doors. You know what? It absolutely does matter, because first off, that's evil behavior. And St. John Chrysostom says that immoralities even carried on in private, like the sodomite behavior, God will bring a curse upon a nation for that. All right.
Yeah. Ultimately,
and that evil even always will spill out in some way. All right. Yeah. And especially if okay, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to read the quote, better than the Antichrist isn't the standard for which we should aim. But
exactly.
Continue.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So,
go ahead.
No, so obviously, there are people who just simply say the Antichrist is always going to be here in 6 months. Obviously, that's not true. If somebody starts preaching to you about the end of the world is going to happen in a year, obviously, I would not believe them, because nobody knows the day nor the hour. All right. But we do have signs. All right. And our Lord gives us those signs in the gospel, and the apostles talk about them, and the fathers preach upon that. All right. So there's a falling away. There's a mass apostasy after the gospel has been preached to the world, the true gospel. There is an attempt to, there's a collapse of nations, wars. There is a world government or establishment of a world government is a sign that you should, if you want to take it on your right hand or your forehead, you will not be allowed to buy or sell. So these are very obvious signs that if you have just common sense, I think you can see it. But even many of the elect will be deceived, according to our Lord. All right. And they will be deceived because people give up common sense. They give up even this just sort of common sense. Like the idea that people have common sense and that allows, no, do people always have common sense, Father Joseph? mean,
No, absolutely not. Yeah,
much are people
sometimes they operate on groupthink.
exactly? How much are they willing to concede about things? All right. I mean, have you ever studied an issue and become very, very familiar with it, and then you look at people who claim to be experts, and you realize that either they're lying or they don't know anything that they're talking about. All right.
Oh, all the time. Well, I thought the COVID thing, proved that a
Yep.
lot,
Absolutely.
many times.
All right. I mean, and there are other examples we could bring up besides COVID. And if you challenge it, these same people in positions of power will do everything they can to discredit you.
Mhm.
All right. So, because I don't know, and some of the, well, whatever. Okay, go ahead.
No, that was it. I didn't have anything else. Okay, well, we are at the 2 hour and basically the 5 minute mark. Again, as always, I want to thank everyone for contributing. I want to thank Father Boniface for coming on. He had some
Yes.
very interesting questions. I want to thank everybody who had questions and comments in the chat. I want to thank everybody who's helped us and supported us and donated. I want to make clear one more time that everybody who has supported the channel and has supported NFTU is in our prayers. If you're Orthodox, you're in the altar. If you're not, you are getting a candle in the chapel. But we're going to pray for everyone who helps us because we really do appreciate everything you do. In any case, I want to thank also Vladika Enoch for always contributing, the knowledge and, information that you have. Honestly, the show wouldn't be what it is without you. And I'd like to thank everyone and have a great night, everyone.
Benedicite.
Benedicite. May God bless all.